Taylor Swift's 2006 self-titled album, often termed colloquially by Swifties debut, is a sprawling country effort from a fledgling artist. And although it is peppered with seeds of diaristic songwriting, emotive storytelling, and of course the world building that secretly ties back to her personal life, all elements that have helped over time to make Taylor Swift the juggernaut that she is today, I find that the debut record is often overlooked. Hi, my name is Vera, and with 11 days remaining until Taylor Swift's 12th studio album, The Life of a Showgirl, comes out, I thought that it'd be nice to combine my love for literature and my love for Taylor Swift's art and recommend you some books based on each album to help with the weight and anticipation over these next few days. Of course, we are starting the countdown with Debut. For these recommendations, I really try to dig deep and extract themes and motifs that I thought made each album resonate so deeply, and to tailor my recommendations based on that instead of more superficial elements. For example, an idea that I find to be very pervasive and really powerful in Debut, more so than any other of her records, is this feeling as if she is your best friend. She positions us as the friend that you might sit with during lunch or giggle around with during math class. Now, this might be a bit of a stretch, but whenever I think of the relationship that Taylor wants us to have with her on this album, I keep going back to the Picture to Burn music video where we see her and her in real life best friend Abigail in the truck. Again, she is obviously Taylor's best friend in real life, and we as listeners are to be positioned in a same sort of parasocial circle. We are Taylor's confidant. And a piece of evidence that I think supports this idea even more is she literally name drops the people that she's singing about, and she doesn't really do that again until Dear John on Speak Now. And you could argue style? Maybe? But here it is very, very direct. You're with her when Corey smiles at her or when Drew ignores her. It's kind of crazy if you think about it, but this enforces this idea that both you and her know these people are in the same sort of world that she is creating. You are familiar with each other. Or, for example, her first heartbreak with the beautiful song Teardrops on My Guitar, which gained her her first push in the country music space thanks to the diaristic lyrics paired with emotive melodies that transported you right there to her as she's driving home alone, turning off the light, putting his picture down, and hoping that she can finally get some sleep at night. In a sense, this album functions as a document of her early days at school. For example, The Outside is a song that she wrote when she was only 12 years old. She wrote about her loneliness, about always being, as she terms it, on the outside looking in. And when it comes to this feeling of loneliness, in a 2010 interview on The Ellen Show, she even said that this was the reason she started writing music. She says, I remember when I was in school, the whole reason why I started writing songs was because I was alone a lot of the time. I'd sit there in school and I'd hear people like, oh my God, this party we're going to is going to be so awesome on Friday. Everybody's invited except for her over there. I just wouldn't be invited to stuff, and I'd sit there and be like, it's okay because I can write a song about this later. It is these beautiful small vignettes that are so locked into her perception of the world around her that really makes Debut stand out. And it is like a chronicle of her childhood because, again, she was writing these songs in real time over years before they were compiled to be released when she was 16. And the book that I think mirrors and plays with very similar ideas of being very locked into this one perspective, journaling about your life, starting in your younger life and moving through time, is Jane Eyre by Charlotte Bronte. First and foremost, this is Jane's story, which she narrates to us in a first-person point of view. Almost like she is telling you a story because she actually refers to us, the readers, quite a lot. We start off learning about her growing up in the home of her heartless aunt after being orphaned, then being a governess to the ward of Mr. Rochester in Thornfield Hall, to the famous love story that then springs forth. But as much as it is a love story, it is also an autobiography of sorts of our heroine throughout all of her years. And of course, this is where Taylor Swift later on took this idea for Invisible String. So to be honest, even though I'm recommending this for Debut, and I do think that it suits Debut way more than Folklore, just in general, the whole book, not just the quote out of context, you're kind of getting 2 for 1. In both Jane Eyre and Debut, we have a girl telling us her story of her childhood, the loneliness, the separation, the being on the outside looking in, whether it's in the orphanage or feeling excluded from Mr. Rochester's, who's much older than Jane, and his circles. But we also get this first budding of what is a love story, what it looks like, what it feels like, how it feels like when it ends. Whether it's on Debut with, all the people that Taylor names in the different songs, or whether it's Jane and Mr. Rochester. We are in there, in that moment, with Jane, exactly the same. We are her friend, her confidant, the same way that we are Taylor's confidant on Debut, because we are so zeroed in to her perspective. And on a slightly, perhaps more sophisticated, higher level, something that I really love about Jane Eyre is that there's this element of being unsure of how reliable her narration is, especially with the ending of the book. Of course, no spoilers because I'm just recommending it to you right now. But since we are so zeroed in to Jane's perspective, we are left grappling with this idea of, are we reading a true account of what has transpired, or one that Jane tells herself because it's her love story? Same way, there are always 2 sides to whatever Taylor writes about, but the emotional truth of the matter doesn't change. And it is that truth of the matter which resonates with us as listeners to the Debut record, or as readers to Jane Eyre. And that is what makes these 2 works stick with us for so long. However, do you remember how I used the word sprawling to describe Debut at the start? Well, that wasn't without cause, because Debut, even though it is so zeroed into Taylor Swift's perspective, it is a very interesting first record because she's not only talking about herself. A lot of the record actually describes other people, other people's lives, their struggles, and their stories. It is not, in other words, monothematic. And this was on purpose. When speaking about the record, Taylor says, I think for me, I just wanted to pick the songs that I thought represented me the best. And, different emotions. And if I had one about being angry, I wasn't going to put another one on that's about being angry. If I had one about missing somebody, I wasn't going to put another one on about that. I tried to cover all bases, but not get repetitive, so that nobody would be able to pigeonhole me and say, oh, this album's all about this or all about that. I didn't want to convey just one emotion. And when we look at the actual album, we see songs like Tied Together with a Smile, which is about her friend dealing with an eating disorder. Or for example, in Mary's song, she describes the lives of 2 neighbors when they were first 7 and 9 till when they are 87 and 89, with each verse and chorus moving through time and documenting them revolving around each other, slowly being pulled together again and again. Or even A Place in This World, a song that, if you know me, I'm not very fond of, but it's all about being told you have to choose what you want to do because college is right around the corner, or feeling lost in the direction of life when you get let out of the academic system in which you were for your entire life, essentially. You're just a girl trying to find a place in this world. Because Debut has all these different songs about all these different things, it acts as an incredible time capsule. And another book that I would never, ever, ever call monothematic, and also uses all these different stories to paint a larger picture, is Dubliners by James Joyce. Now, I know a lot of people get intimidated when they hear the name James Joyce. And fair enough, his books like Ulysses or Finnegan's Wake are really challenging, and I do not feel like I am able to broach those books yet, but one day it's going to happen, I promise. But Dubliners uses really easy to read language, and I was honestly surprised because it feels and reads quite modern. Essentially, Dubliners is an anthology of 15 stories all about the different people living in Dublin in the early 20th century. And it's important that it's Dubliners, not Dublin. It's about the people living in the city. In his letters to Vincent, his brother, James Joyce writes, "My intention was to write a chapter in the moral history of my country, and I chose Dublin for the scene because that city seemed to me the center of paralysis. I have tried to present it to the indifferent public under 4 of its aspects: childhood, adolescence, maturity, and public life. The stories are arranged in this order." Look, I love an anthology where not only the short stories are incredible, but the collection together paints this greater picture about a certain place in time. And that is exactly what Dubliners is. It is incredible in how it captures not only the people of Dublin in this state of paralysis, as James Joyce said in the quote, especially regarding the British influence, but also the Celtic revival, church, alcoholism, and class. The way I like to think about Dubliners, especially given this idea of different stories pertaining to the adolescence, childhood, maturity, and public life of Dubliners, is as little tiles, and they come together forming this incredible mosaic. And my personal favorite tiles, if you will, that form this picture are the sisters, Eveline, counterparts, and a painful case. And it's all tied together at the end, at least thematically, with the longest short story called The Dead, which acts as a coda. Debut also uses all these different songs that I've already mentioned to ultimately paint a very holistic image of a certain place and time. Obviously, we are not talking about Dublin in the 20th century, but rather the high school Americana of it all in the 2000s. And although Taylor's writing was still not at the level as it is today, or even as it was on her sophomore album Fearless, I think the emotional resonance of this picture is very clear. Also, just on a more superficial note, something that I find interesting is the framing of both Dubliners and Debut, because I find it to be quite similar. So the first short story and the last short story, The Sister and The Dead respectively in Dubliners, are actually interchangeable titles. And I'd actually argue that Tim McGraw to Our Song, even though they're not interchangeable per se, there is something to be said about it being a great framing device for the album, with Tim McGraw being about Taylor asking someone to remember her when he hears a Tim McGraw song, to her now saying, we don't need a Tim McGraw song because we have our song and we create our song. I think that's very beautiful. The next theme, I'm going to tie back a little bit to what I was saying earlier about those vignettes, because something that I really think is special about Debut is just when it comes to documenting love, it is so good at zooming in on those teeny tiny scenes and then using those teeny tiny scenes to build up a greater love story. It's almost like using the different songs to build up the holistic image of the high school Americana in the 2000s. But in this case, it's not the different songs building together to form a certain image, but it's rather the different scenes within a song that help to ultimately create a mosaic that is the emotion expressed by the song. And this is one of my favorite things that Taylor Swift does just within her entire discography, but it's really beautiful to see the start of that in this album. And I think that storytelling is something that country music is so well known for. And so obviously I have to highlight this in this video. For example, she actually starts off the album in the song Tim McGraw saying, "He said the way my blue eyes shined, put those Georgia stars to shame that night. I said, that's a lie. Just a boy in a Chevy truck that had a tendency of getting stuck on back roads at night." Very, very transportative. You're right there in there. And with so few words, she is able to elicit such a clear image. Or of course, the fan favorite, Our Song, starting off again in a very, very, very specific scene of her riding shotgun with her hair undone in the front seat of his car and him asking, "Baby, is something wrong?" And she says, "Nothing, I was just thinking how we don't have a song." And then the premise of what is this Our Song unfolds from there. A book that does this really well is actually a book that changed my opinion on romance novel. I'm sorry to say, but I was for a long time a huge literary snob, and I didn't want, to be associated with that. But then I read this book and I was blown away. and it's People We Meet on Vacation by Emily Henry. This book is about two best friends who have nothing in common, but they were best friends for over a decade. You have Poppy, who is wild, adventurous writer, and she thrives on spontaneity, contrasted with Alex, who is a buttoned-up teacher who prefers the routine and quiet. However, despite their differences, every single summer they've taken a special trip together to create some unforgettable memories. That is until 2 years ago when something happened on one of those trips that caused a falling out. And now Poppy is just really depressed, and despite having what she always wanted, when she thinks about the last time that she was truly happy, she realizes that it was on one of those vacations that she had with her friend Alex. So she calls him up to see if he'd be up for just one last trip. The way this book uses those little vignettes is actually because it's told in the dual timelines. So you have the present day, which follows this reunion, I guess, if you can call it that, but you also have these flashbacks, these little tiny scenes that slowly over the course of the book build up a picture of why Poppy and Alex have so much love for each other, how their friendship formed, and ultimately what broke them apart. And to be honest, it's been a couple of years since I read this book, but whenever I think back on it, I think of those tiny vignettes, whether it's the iceberg, whether it's the sickness, you know, not trying to spoil anything, but it's those little vignettes that I think of, or the car scene. Oh my gosh. Because they just stand out so well in my mind. And when I think of debut, it's the songs that I feel have the best concept, the most direct scene vignette that they are depicting that are so transportative. And also, can I just say, the movie is coming out soon-ish. They released the poster and it's actual perfection. Tom Blythe is playing Alex, and I'm so unwell and I can't wait. So I will be very annoying when that movie comes out, and I really hope it's good. So if you need a time to read your first Emily Henry novel, let me tell you, now's the time. The last book that I want to recommend for this video is rooted in the country aesthetics of the album and how important that is to the album. Because it's not just the visual aesthetic or the sound aesthetic, I guess, or influence that made debut what it was, but it was the entire country scene. It was Taylor being a country fan for so long and wanting to finally add her voice into this mix that she has admired for so long, wanting to pay homage there. Something that really made Taylor successful and keeps her so enthralling to so many people around the world is the country tradition of musical storytelling. And that is still very much felt throughout all of her projects. Sometimes a bit more intensely, like the Tortured Poets Department, which was almost overwritten at times, but was really leaning into, again, some of those country sounds, for example, on I Can Fix Him, No Really I Can. But sometimes it is a little bit withheld, like it was on Midnights with songs like Question that didn't really reveal themselves to us what they could be about until much further down the line. But it all stems back to the lessons that Taylor learned in country. Every single song on the record is some sort of story that you can follow. And trying to fit into Nashville's country scene really helped her get a foot in the door by presenting an authentic, relatable image and helping her stand out as a songwriter. Of course, the aesthetics, the actual aesthetics were strategic as well. She was young and writing about ordinary teenage experiences, so that pairing with the small town country vibe made her more accessible and, importantly, more marketable to this demographic that perhaps wasn't catered to as much by country music. Young teenage girls. Someone had to fill in that gap, right? So obviously, for my last recommendation, I had to pick a book that vaguely had similar vibes with growing up in a small town, this feeling of isolation, the mix of coming of age and romance, but also a book that is so tied to the setting that it describes that the setting almost becomes like a character in and of itself. And the book that I want to recommend is Where the Crawdads Sing. It is a mashup of a coming of age story and a murder mystery and a love story. So you're really getting a 3-in-1. We follow Kaya Clark, who grows up totally alone in the marshes of North Carolina. Her family slowly abandons her one by one, and she has to figure out how to survive by herself. Everybody in the town kind of ostracizes her. They call her the marsh girl and don't want her to intermingle with them too much. But she's all right with that. She loves the marsh. The marsh itself becomes a character. And actually the prologue to the book is one of the best setting, world building and settings descriptions that I've ever read in my life. I also think it's very highly telling that we have those 2 pages that Delia Owens writes, contrasting the idea of what is a marsh and what is a swamp, and that is what she wants to focus on at the start. Because so often what we start a book with is going to be a very important factor in the development, and obviously the setting is very important. The book jumps between 2 timelines, just like People We Meet on Vacation. One is about Kaya's past, showing her childhood, her growing up and learning. And then the second is a present day murder investigation of this popular guy called Chase Andrews, who is found dead, and everybody obviously suspects the marsh girl, Kaya Clark. It is a slow and poetic read, but it is also very tense as you're trying to figure out who killed Chase and whether Kaya at the end of the day will be all right. So if you want to read a book where the setting is a very important character and shapes the story, kind of like the country's setting and scene is a character on debut and really shapes what that record had to become in order for Taylor to have a foot in the door, well then I think you should check out Where the Crawdads Sing. Anyway, those were my 4 recommendations for Taylor Swift's self-titled debut record. If you read these books, please do let me know what you think of them, and if there are any other recommendations based on debut that you would like to share, let me know in the comments. Also, it would mean the world to me if you're still watching, if you could like and subscribe to this channel, because it really helps out a lot. Anyway, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you tomorrow with the Fearless recommendations. Bye-bye!